Breaking right now. The bombs were supposed to fall tonight.
Status on Iranian air defenses? Green light. Proceed.
The power plants that keep 87 million Iranians alive. The oil terminals that keep their economy breathing. And now a look at the military installations that keep their regime standing.
Move the crates to the east wing. Load the vehicles. Roger. Securing the perimeter now.
All were targeted for destruction in the early hours of March 31st, 2026. The aircraft were fueled, the missiles were armed, the 50,000 troops were ready.
Control, Eagle 1. Final checks complete. Awaiting orders. Stand by for launch.
And then at 7:23 p.m. Eastern Time on March stopped it all.
And then at 7:23 p.m. Eastern Time on March 30th, a social media post stopped it all.
I have decided to postpone the military strikes on Iranian power plants' energy infrastructure for 5 days, the president wrote, as casually as someone rescheduling a dinner party. 5 days, not because the objectives had changed, not because the threats had diminished,
but because, as the post explained, there were negotiations going on.
An Iranian official today firmly denied reports of any secret negotiations.
We categorically deny these claims. There are no negotiations. The denial was immediate and non-equivocal.
Negotiations that no diplomat could confirm.
I can't confirm. The reports are inconsistent. No, I need verification. This is frustrating. This is going nowhere.
President who has learned that reality can be created by maiden exertion, but established by repetition, that the world will adjust to his claims because the alternative is too dangerous to contemplate. And while this fiction of negotiations was being created and denied, real events were unfolding that exposed the gap between presidential fantasy and ground truth. The commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy, the man who had threatened to burn American soldiers, was confirmed dead. American universities across the region were closing their doors. What's happening? They can't just close it like this.
This is crazy. Where do we go now?
And the ships that the president claimed as Iranian tribute turned out to be Pakistani commercial vessels with no connection to Tehran's diplomacy. Welcome to the twilight zone of modern warfare, where strikes are postponed by tweet, where regime change is declared by proclamation, and where the fate of millions hangs on the mood of one man. Breaking news, a major military operation has been unexpectedly postponed.
What postponed? This is chaos. Who's responsible? General, orders confirmed. Stand down immediately. This is insane. Hey, we need to act.
Commanders who had been preparing their forces for imminent combat
were instructed to stand down. Pilots who had been briefed on targets were told to return to quarters. The order is to stand down.
Ships that had been positioned for missile launch were ordered to hold their fire.
Hold fire? What are they seeing that we're not? Intel is vague. Stay sharp.
The machinery of war, which had been accelerating toward execution, was suddenly idled by 280 characters posted on a social media platform.
The explanation offered was simultaneously specific and absurd. The president claimed that he had received information on a possible future attack on the United States that was largely false and exaggerated. We now go to a briefing where military advisors are making a grim recommendation.
Mr. President, despite the risks, we recommend proceeding with strikes. However, the president has decided to postpone for negotiation.
The logic was incoherent. If the threat information was false, why mention it? If military advisors recommended strikes, why override them? None of this makes sense. It's just illogical. If negotiations were the reason for postponement, what were those negotiations about? Who was conducting them? And why had no other party confirmed their existence? The 5-day timeline was equally mysterious. Not 2 days, which might suggest an immediate diplomatic opportunity. Not 2 weeks, which might allow for serious negotiation. 5 days.
A period long enough to demonstrate restraint, short enough to maintain pressure, arbitrary enough to suggest that the number had been chosen without strategic calculation. The deadline of April 4th, 2026 now hangs over the crisis like a sword, promising resolution or escalation without clarifying which.
In Tehran, officials react with relief and confusion to an unexpected diplomatic claim.
Relief, but this makes no sense. We did not agree to this. Who authorized? We must find out.
In Washington, military planners who had been executing orders were suddenly instructed to pause, to preserve readiness, to maintain the posture of imminent attack without actually attacking. In the region, populations who had been bracing for war were told to relax.
To trust in negotiations that did not exist, to believe that the threat had passed when it had only been delayed.
But we must stay wary.
The Iranian response to this claimed diplomacy was immediate and categorical.
With the power of the Iran paths, the Iranian Foreign Ministry issued a statement that denied any direct or indirect negotiations or talks in the last 24 hours. The denial was not qualified, not nuanced, not accompanied by hints of secret channels or backdoor communications. It was absolute. There had been no talks. The American claim was false.
This contradiction created a situation without precedent in diplomatic history. A superpower was claiming to be engaged in negotiations that its adversary explicitly denied.
The superpower was maintaining military pressure based on negotiations that did not exist. The adversary was preparing for war while being told that peace was being discussed. The gap between these realities could not be bridged by compromise because the gap was not a difference of position but a difference of fact. Either there were negotiations or there were not. Either the president was telling the truth or he was not. The evidence supported one conclusion. The president asserted the other. Here, the scales of justice are heavily tipped bias. The Adershan pan is high. The imbalance is striking. The postponement post was not the only presidential communication that day. Earlier, the president had claimed that regime change had been achieved in Iran, that a whole different group of people were now in charge, that the long-sought objective of American policy had been accomplished without the invasion that military planners had been preparing. The claim was extraordinary. It had governed since 1979, that had survived the Iraq War, that had withstood decades of American pressure, had been replaced in a matter of days by airstrikes and covert operations. The evidence for this claim was non-existent. We applied the no evidence stamp again and again, no proof. This claim is discredited. The facts are clear. The same Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who had been in power since 1989, remained in his position. The same President Masoud Pezeshkian, who had been elected in 2024, continued to govern. The same Revolutionary Guard that had been the regime's enforcer remained active, still commanding its proxies, still threatening its enemies, still denying the negotiations that the American president claimed it. Coup? Revolution? Collapse? There had been no coup, no revolution, no collapse of state authority. A whole different group of people existed only in presidential assertion. This is not a matter of debate but of declaration. Their existence is defined by this assertion alone. Ladies and gentlemen, witness the impossible. I conjure a new reality from thin air! The purpose of this claim was not to describe reality, but to create it. Hasn't was framed in directions, the president was a template that would just doubtfully Pikes already won, that would allow him to claim victory without the costs of actual military operations.
If regime change had been achieved, then further strikes were unnecessary. If regime change had been achieved, then negotiations could proceed from a position of American strength. The Iranian response to this claim was contemptuous silence. The regime did not dignify the assertion with reputation. It simply continued to operate, to govern, to threaten, to deny.
I don't see it. The claim doesn't match.
The difference between American claim and Iranian reality was left to observers to assess, to analyze, to believe, or to sign.
It's not right.
Maybe it means something else. For those who trusted the president, regime change was real. For those who trusted evidence, it was fantasy. Two maps, side by side, showing conflicting information. The conflict between these perspectives was not resolvable by fact because facts had become partisan, because reality had become contested, because the information environment had fractured into parallel universes of belief. The military implications of this claim were serious regardless of its truth.
If we proceed, these areas here and here pose significant risks of escalation. We must weigh these negative outcomes carefully.
If regime change had been achieved, then the strikes being prepared were unnecessary, even counterproductive, potentially destabilizing a new government that American policy should support. If regime change had not been achieved, then the claim was disinformation that would confuse American allies, embolden American enemies, and complicate military operations by creating false expectations of collapse. The planners who had been preparing for invasion were now operating in an environment where
They're on there too, asserting objectives that their operations could not achieve, claiming victories that their strikes could not produce.
it's completely stymied. While the president was claiming regime change and postponing strikes, the Iranian military was confirming a loss that demonstrated the reality of the conflict. Allah is officially declared dead. He commands the naval force in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, the force countering the Iranian threat to global energy and regional proxies. His death removed a key operational commander at a moment of maximum tension. It demonstrated that American targeting had penetrated Iranian security, that leadership positions offered. The circumstances of his death remain disputed. American sources claimed a precision airstrike based on intelligence. Iranian sources suggested an explosion at a naval base, possibly
To the Americans, its survival exist, creating paranoia about infiltration and betrayal. For the Iranians, it provided flexibility in response, allowing them to choose between claiming martyrdom or admitting vulnerability.
The Iranian response to Tanguiri's death was a promise of retaliation that was not postponed by the American claim of negotiations. The Revolutionary Guard issued a statement. This promise of retaliation created a contradiction that the postponement could not resolve. If negotiations were proceeding, why promise revenge? If a cries for escalate? The Iranian position was consistent. There were no negotiations.
There had been no regime change. The conflict would continue.
Strikes were postponed for negotiations that did not coherent. The president claimed diplomatic progress, saying Iran let 20 ships pass the Strait of Hormuz as a sign of respect. That claim was immediately debunked. We'll have more on this developing story. The reality was different. The 20 ships were not Iranian. They were Pakistani commercial vessels carrying cargo between Pakistani ports with no connection to Iranian diplomacy or American. The tribute was fiction. The sign of respect was fantasy. The ships were simply going about their business, unaware that they had become props in an American president's narrative of diplomatic success. This confusion exposed the information environment in which the crisis was being managed. The president was receiving or creating intelligence that did not correspond to reality.
The question of whether this confusion was deliberate deception or genuine misunderstanding was less important than its effect. The erosion of credibility, the multiplication of uncertainty, the creation of a decision-making environment where fact and fiction were indistinguishable.
Knight to e4.
The military implications of this confusion were serious.
No! That blunders the knight!
If he maintained the posture of negotiation,
While the president was claiming progress and postponing strikes, American institutions across the region were responding to the reality of continued threat. The American University of Army Merkinarkania. This closure was part of a pattern that extended across the Middle East and beyond. American universities in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates, in Turkey and Central Asia. The 5 days of postponement are not a peace. They are a preparation for war that might be averted or might simply be delayed. The 5 days are counting down. The strikes are prepared, the commander is dead, the talks are denied. And the world is watching to see whether reality or fantasy will determine what happens next.